One position to understand the pawn breaks and pawn storms. One position to deeply dive into chess middle games to extract as many lessons as possible. Here is one such position, folks. When I found this position, I told myself I had to make a video about this because it contains so many nice teachable moments which you can apply to different contexts. Black to play in this position, folks. Black has an extra pawn right now. But look at the bigger picture, please. What are you seeing? What are the most interesting imbalances, let's say, in this position? What attracts your attention? The orientation phase. Before we look at random moves, we must take a moment and try to understand the position demands. Because once you understand that, once you truly understand the goal of the position, then good ideas will naturally come to you. What is the most striking difference between white and black? I would say the king's locations, right? King safety is the most important element in chess. So the kings have castle on opposite flanks. This immediately makes the position much sharper. We talk about pawn storms in those middle games. Well, the idea becomes whoever creates open files for their heavy pieces and attacks the opponent's king usually wins those middle games. And in those middle games, the value of a single pawn drops even more. Black is an extra pawn, but if black doesn't act to the position's requirements, namely to create an attack ASAP and play actively in its position, then white will take over the game. How? Can you see? Gary will meet Harry. Black already played h5, that's the h pawn that can be used as a hook pawn to open up lines on the king side. And white's rook is already well positioned to support the break g4. Then the question becomes, what would white play if black doesn't make a move right now? And given what we talked about so far, they will play g4 most likely, and they want to create open files for their heavy pieces. This already shows us dynamism is required here. Okay, we have to play with active pieces. Okay, by the way, this process takes maybe 5 seconds for a grandmaster's brain because they've seen these positions many times. So this doesn't take any time for a strong player to notice instantly. But of course, my main goal on this channel is to break down those concepts for post-beginners, intermediate players that need support, that need to consolidate those ideas in their long-term memories. Okay, that's why I'm taking more time in my videos. Okay, so now comes the first phase. This bishop would become a good piece on this diagonal, but right now this pawn chain is blunting that piece. The same goes for the knight. The knight has no forwards moves from the square. The knight also gets in the way of our c5 pawn break, which would, let's say, activate the bishop on this long diagonal, right? So our pieces are a little bit clumsy on c6 and g7. Maybe there's a way for us to change the picture using a pawn break. Okay, guys? So here comes my first question. Is there a pawn break available in the black's position that activate those two guys? Yes. e5 pawn break must be a candidate move for black, given its connection to piece activity. We want to play e5. Why? Because we want to activate our pieces and strike in the center of the board. White has better central control, given those two pawns, right? They control those two key central squares. Even e4 central square is controlled fully by the white pieces, and even d4, you might say, is controlled by white. So white has really good influence in the center of the board, right? These are the 4 central squares. White is better in the center of the board. So e5 is also very logical to dispute that advantage and strike when the iron is hot in its position, okay? So, but the moment you play e5, you must understand one thing, and many players of course never do that, post-beginners. They don't really ask themselves whether the opponent has a tricky move that can, let's say, make it more difficult for us to activate our pieces. For example, d5 is a very natural response that black should have seen before playing e5. Because think about that, guys. After e5, d5, the bishop didn't improve much. There's still a pawn that is hemming in the piece on g7, and even that knight has to retreat right now. Let's say knight e7, and white is now getting ready for their pawn storm on the king side. If you allow the move g4, it's white who is having a clear advantage in his position, and the reason is their attack is starting first on the king side. You do not really manage to activate your minor pieces by the move e5. Here if you want to go h4 to keep things closed, the problem is g5 is coming, guys, and they will really easily even get the pawn if they want to, but maybe even knight e4 to f6, right? And their attack is again starting first on the king side. So after e5, d5, here comes the key moment. Just a beautiful game. It's full of resources. Given timing is very important in this middle game, and given that you don't want to waste time and retreat your pieces and allow g4, there is one very energetic move for black in this position that is the only move to keep the advantage. And you're a great player if you found the move e4, guys. e4 is a very nice positional pawn sacrifice. Two huge points behind the move e4. First of all, you're awakening your fianchetto bishop. That will be a golden unopposed bishop in this position, right? White has no dark square bishop, black has. So by playing e4, tempo on the queen, you're liberating your piece. Second point, can you see this e5 outpost that you create by pushing e4? Two of your pieces are thanking you for this positional pawn sacrifice. This is a very clean and great example of a positional pawn sacrifice, because people keep asking me, how do I know if my positional sacrifice is strong or weak? Perfect moment, right? It connects to timing, it connects to g4 being such a great idea for white, it connects to playing those sharp middle games very energetically. Also, black has an extra pawn anyhow. So in some sense, the best part of having the material advantage in chess is at the right moment, you can give the material back just like that, right? Second big teachable moment from this game is black chose the right timing to give up the extra pawn and liberate their pieces, okay? e4, knight takes e4, what's the move? Of course, knight e5. The knight moves forward, establishes itself on this beautiful e5 outpost. What makes an outpost? Outposts are squares that cannot be guarded by the enemy pawns. White has no way to attack that knight with f4 or d4 pawns in its pawn formation, which makes this a weak square or an outpost in chess. Beautiful piece. Comes with tempo on the queen, plus you even activated your, let's say, heavy pieces on the e-file by this positional pawn sacrifice. You can now play queen e7, for example, and start piling up on the e-file. Maybe rook e8 is coming anyhow on the next turn. Notice queen e7 also stops g4 because you can even engage in this plan, guys. Let's say takes and rook e8, rook a8 even, and this knight is under heavy fire. If the knight moves, then you can even take the pawn on e3 and remain as an extra pawn in this endgame with a clearly winning position for black. Beautiful bishop, extra pawn, beautiful rooks. Black is winning. So after queen e7, let's look at the move bishop c2. This video is far from finished. Now we are coming to a beautiful part, namely the pawn storms and how pawn storm positions should be played. Okay? Kings on opposite flanks, you managed to activate beautiful pieces like that. Even the queen is a nice piece. I want you to come up with one more plan. Remember, white wants to play g4 on the next turn. It's a very sharp position still. Dynamism is very important. Timing is very important. There is no time to waste. Your goal is to activate your pieces on the b file and align against the king on b1. So what's the move that gives you that? You're a great player, folks, if you want the move b5. Another beautiful positional pawn sacrifice. The basic idea is very simple. You want to open up the b file and place your rooks on that file to create an attack against your opponent's king. Pawn sacrifices in pawn storm positions become very obvious and powerful, but many people don't have this conception, right? Because they didn't deeply analyze those pawn storm positions. They didn't understand the true value of a single tempo in those positions, and b5 is the only move that gives black a clear edge in this position. Very instructive. C takes b5, let's say, right? We'll come back to this position and maybe we can have a look at the move g4 later on. 5. How do you follow this up, guys? Rook p8 is a good move, but even a6 is a great move. You want to really clear either the b file or the a file for your rooks to gain activity as soon as possible, right? That's a beautiful move. Let's imagine white takes on a6 in this position. What's your next move, guys? Rook b8, of course. This rook was doing nothing on f8. Now the rook is beautifully aligned with the king on b1. The pawn on b7 was only a piece of wood getting in the way of your rooks. Now your rooks are thanking you. You can even double them up. You can do this to pile up against the pawn on b2. Plus, can you see the coordination between your beautiful bishop and rook on that weakness on b2? Already here, there are big threats of simply moving the knight and attacking the b2 point. Well, b4 looks like a chess crime because they are weakening their king even more and weakening the entire diagonal even more, right? So black has many ways in this position to play. Maybe rook b6 even, simplest possible way to simply take the pawn and attack the target on a3. And if king c1 is position, guys, maybe that's the only way for white to fight. Again, knight d7, very simply putting pressure on the pawn on b2, and white is having real trouble guarding that. This position you should try against your sparring partners, where you can set this position on a physical board and analyze and understand why black is simply so much better. What if white doesn't take the pawn on b5 and focus on their storm on the king side? This actually makes more sense. You don't want to waste time on the opposite flanks in such positions. Here, black should take with the knight because piece activity wise, that's a much better move. Also creating this e5 square for the queen, right? After g takes h5 comes queen e5. Can you see it, guys? Black doesn't care about the pawn, just simply focuses on their plan. Well, rook d4 is the only move, but now can you see a beautiful winning shot for black? The rook is, let's say, a loose piece, only guarded by the pawn on e3 in this position. So there's a way to remove the defender, and the move is knight takes e3. Can you see it? Now the rook is becoming hanging. If you take my knight, then queen takes d4, and that's a completely winning position for black with an extra exchange. Beautiful bishop, right? So after knight takes e3, in fact, black is a winning position. And after b5, c takes b5, a6, maybe now white can ignore the pawn and play g4. That's actually a much better choice for white. And after takes, right, white is sort of getting closer to their dreams on the h file, let's say. Maybe some knight f6 ideas in the air. Takes b5, activates the rook. g5, very logical. White wants to, let's say, clamp on f6 and introduce those ideas at some point. Black is to be careful. For example, if I ask you this way, what should black play in this position? What's the most energetic move for black? And the move is b4. The same idea, right? Both sides are sort of ignoring each other. That's a pawn storms middle game pattern for you, right? Attack speed becomes important. And if white plays the move a4 to keep it closed, you tell me the move for black, please. Only move for black that keeps black in a better position. And the move is, of course, b3. Otherwise, white might play b3 and close down the queen side. b3 is a beautiful positional pawn sacrifice. Bishop takes b3, rook b8. That's what I'm talking about. Every single tempo counts, and that pawn was a piece of wood that is getting in the way of the black rooks. You just sacrifice it, and black has a better position. Knight f6 is the only way, most likely. Otherwise, the bishop will be a monster on this diagonal. But even so, the knight becomes a monster. The bishop is a very bad piece on b3. Now under fire as well. King a2, well, rook a7. Couple of ideas, right? That could be beautiful doubling on the b file for the rooks. The queen defends the king side single-handedly. That's a beautiful thing. Rook b7. I guess that becomes obvious right now that black has a clear advantage. Material is not so important. It's equal number of pawns. Even white has, let's say, this beautiful pawn, pass pawn on a4. But as long as the kings are on the board, as long as the queens are still there, attack becomes the name of the day. And here white is really facing a hugely difficult task. e4 is the only move to guard the bishop. But even then, knight d7, knight c5 is coming. The queen also gets active on this long diagonal. The bishop cannot move because of the b2 problem. White is facing enormous difficulties, guys. Knight c5 attacks the bishop as well. Rook f7 is the only way, but then comes queen h6. A beautiful move, escaping the attack and keeping the queens on the board. Now this is sort of collapsing on the queen side for white. The bishop is hanging on b3. The only move is bishop d1 in this position, guys. But here black can even go for this exchange of two rooks for the queen, just to expose the king, also to be able to return the knight to this beautiful e5 outpost, attacking the rook. Rook f8 check, king g7. There are no check on f7 because of the beautiful knight. And now queen and knight combo, exposed king, is giving black a winning position, right? Despite, let's say, white might be even slightly better in terms of pure material count. The king is too exposed, queen is coming to e3 or c1 checks, right? This game is completely actually finished. Objectively, black is completely winning this position, guys. If black slips off this positional pawn sacrifice but plays, let's say, rook b8 in this position, white takes over the game with bishop b3, simply preventing the b3 pawn sacrifice and keeping those rooks terribly stuck on the b and a files. Meanwhile, they have all the ideas on the king side to intensify their pressure, right? A single tempo can change the entire evaluation in such pawn storm positions. So again, b4 is the only move for black, but white shouldn't take on b4. They should play the move rook f1, preparing knight f6 check. And here b takes a3. Good move, but then comes knight f6 check. Black has to find this line of takes and queen e8 to claim some advantage. Guys, this pawn looks very dangerous, of course, but the knight is nicely defending this g6 point. That's a beautiful piece. Just to show you the value of a single tempo in such positions, it looks like white is crushing us on the h-file, like that. But it's black who is having a better position after a takes b2, because if white ignores us and go for the checkmate, it's black who is winning with rook a1 check. Everything is forced. Knight c4 check, a beautiful move, because also queen e3 check ideas are there of king c3. So if you take on a1, comes a beautiful queen a8 check, queen and knight combo, rook b8 check, right? A single tempo. Our pieces came to the queen side first, and it's black who won this game. Incredible. I'm giving you those lines just to improve the sense of timing in pawn storm positions. That this move must be played. This move, b3, must be played because your goal is to, as soon as possible, crush through the queen side. If you wait with this move, with a slow move, then it's white who is slowly crushing you on the king side. So once again, what did we learn from this example, guys? Teachable moment number 1. Kings on opposite flanks, sense of timing should go up. Pawn storms are becoming very important. You have a hook pawn, the opponent's plan, right? You have a hook pawn on h5, g4 is coming. Very, very soon, you must be careful. How to activate your pieces. Teachable moment number 2. e5 pawn break attempts to activate both of your pieces on the condition that in this position you find the move e4. The first positional pawn sacrifice. Couple of ideas. Piece activity, of course. And finally, this key moment. Remember, once you activate your pieces, comes the next stage. How do I go for the attack on the queen side before white can crush me on the king side? And the move is b5. Even a6 will be too slow because g4 is on the board. Now you're facing difficulties. After takes, right, b5, you are one tempo down in what we just seen before. They will play g5. They will ignore you, of course. They will totally ignore you on that side. Maybe rook h1 is coming, right, with those ideas. You have to be so careful on the king side in this position. So, can you see the cost of a single time-wasting move a6? No, b5 is the pawn break. Direct clash, pawn break. Right? Imagine pawn breaks. What does a pawn break do? They create conflict. They create clashes. They create opening up potential. And your goal is to, of course, open up the b file for your rooks as soon as possible. And the pawn break, of course, gives you that. Pawn breaks usually helps the rook's activity in chess because they almost always create new open files or semi-open files in chess. Thus, there is no time to waste. b5 was the best move. And if white obliges, which they shouldn't do, and if they take both of our pawns, then you should be very happy to come to this position. Forget the material count. If you only look at the material count all these pawns, you might claim that white is better. No, it's all about piece activity, difference, and whose king is safer, right? Pawn storm positions is mainly about king's safety. So the moment you activate your rooks, the moment you make them happy, their king will be facing enormous difficulties, right? We have all these ideas I'm listing to you. We even saw them in this video. You should be very happy as black to come to this position. You should observe your pawns as merely hindrances of your piece activity in those sharp opposite side castling middle game positions. This was the final goal of this video. Right after e5, d5, knight e7, white can even play e4. If some of you thought e4 is actually much more logical because e4 really stops the positional pawn sacrifice e4 and even buries the knight on e7. You're also correct, by the way. e4 was also a good move for white. Yes, black has one extra pawn, but it's not felt. What is seen in its position is that g4 is coming on the next turn, and they are going to crush you on the king's side by opening up lines. And indeed, white stands better in this position. And the final golden nugget of information, when you have the material advantage, you should look at ways to just ditch extra material to gain positional advantages like that, right? Perfect moment of giving away the extra pawn for piece activity for black. That's why this position is gold. How many things we learned in a single position. It's incredible. Pawn break to activate our pieces. Positional pawn sacrifice to awaken the knight and the bishop, right? Giving away extra material at the right timing to gain positional advantages. Pawn storms and the value of a pawn in such cases. Observing our pawns as a piece of wood in such cases. The sense of timing, cost of a single tempo. We learn so many great lessons in a single position that you can apply to vastly different middle games. And that's my goal with such instructive puzzles. I'm not publishing every single day, but my videos are of good quality positions that I craft after years of experience of chess coaching, right? These positions are distilled after years of practice. I'm really showing them the best of the best quality positions on my videos, but also on my courses. Most of the gold positions, of course, go to my courses on Chessable, right? So my goal as a teacher is to really find those teachable moments and those multi-purpose positions that can highlight so many nice chess middle game concepts, like here. I hope I achieved my goal. I hope you became a better player after this video. But a single video is not enough, obviously. So to consolidate this knowledge, please check my recent course on Chessable, The Art of Chess, a practical workbook. That course will also serve like a diagnostic tool for you to notice certain weaknesses in your game. Maybe you really have trouble in finding those positional pawn sacrifices to awaken your pieces. Then you go and study the actual course, The Art of Awakening Pieces, to fix these holes in your games. Also, please check this playlist on YouTube on middle game planning. I created an entire playlist on finding good middle game ideas by reading the situation on the board, just as we did today, right? We took the first maybe 2-3 minutes to read the board properly and understand the position's demands from us. Then good ideas came to our mind naturally from there. Okay, guys, that's it for today. If you like this video, I would really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing to my channel. It really helps me moving forward to create quality videos for you to help you improve at this beautiful game. Learning is a joy. Learning is a beautiful thing. And I'm really becoming happy if I teach you something new today. Thank you so much.